And welcome back to the Angry Marks Pro Wrestling and Mixed Martial Arts podcast. I'm your host, Stevie J, and we are joined now by a very special guest who is proud to announce that Chikara is back. Returning to the show is the founder of Chikara, Mike Quackenbush. Mike, good evening.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure to have you on, and it's been quite a momentous week ever since National Pro Wrestling Day. I think that announcement caught a lot of people by surprise, as did a DeLorean showing up. That certainly caught me by surprise.
Right on. Well, I'm delighted that people are hearing about what happened at National Pro Wrestling Day, because I think of the fans out there that really might enjoy the type of wrestling that we make at Chikara, some were aware of the storyline building into National Pro Wrestling Day, but some are just discovering it now. And I want to make sure that they get to hear about everything we've been up to, especially since the story began that made it appear as if Chikara had gone dark back in last June.
Absolutely, and I wanted to get some clarification on that for our listeners and for anybody that's tuning in, just finding out about Chikara, that they'll get the whole story. For me, it goes back to that iPay-per-view when all of a sudden during the middle of Eddie Kingston's title match, everything was shut down. The banners were stripped down, people were told to leave the building, some of the fans were upset. Obviously, this was building up to the storyline that we have now, but nobody in the audience was clued in on that. So it left some people, a little bit frustrated. So now you can finally clear the air on that this was all part of the plan.
That's true. And to those people that felt frustrated, I certainly hope that they know that was never our goal. It's unfortunate that was the byproduct, and there certainly were fans that were frustrated by this story. And that wasn't our intent, believe me. What we were trying to do, though, is tell a very out-of-the-box story, unlike anything that's been attempted before in wrestling. And whether we have succeeded or failed, there's more of the story yet to come. I guess the historians will write. But to your point, and to be very clear about it, this has been a story that is a long time in preparation, a long time foreshadowing and setting up, and required the work of many, many people working tirelessly to execute. But at the end of the day, it was a wrestling story. And I just wanted to kind of make that clear to everybody, because I think during the period of time that we went to radio silence, in the 7 weeks that followed Never Compromise, in the absence of our official narrative, people began to invent their own narrative. And unfortunately, a lot of that just wasn't true. It was very difficult for us to remain silent, seeing the things that people were saying or writing, whether it was about me or my crew, or even my wife, who's been 100% supportive of all my creative endeavors at Chikara since the very first. And it is important to me now to get out there and clear the air and to show people this is the story at work. And I think to help dispel some of the confusion, because it has been very complex.
It has, and I'm glad you brought up your wife as well, because a lot of people were sending me rumors like, Quackenbush got divorced, he had to sell the company, that's why they went out of business the way they did. And obviously, as you said yourself, that was the fans inventing their own narrative, which is why I never ran those stories, because I never had any confirmation on that.
Right. And thank you for that. And I think that's one of my main reasons for wanting to get out there and address things very, very honestly right now, because typically in Chikara, we prefer to maintain the mystique of pro wrestling, and I think that speaks to the experience I want to give our fans. However, it really isn't possible at times to speak very plainly about what we're doing while also respecting that mystique. So today I want to be able to step out from behind the curtain a little bit and talk about the story that we've told, what we've been up to all along, and what's upcoming from Chikara, so people can hear it direct from me.
All right, well then let's get a little clarification right now on the Teeter conglomerate, because they're a huge part of this storyline, and there's also some time travel implications with the name John Teeter and some of the things that went on the internet back in the 90s that people who didn't delve deeply into this narrative may not understand that he was purportedly a time traveler for the future, and the Teeter conglomerate got their name from that.
Mm-hmm. You're right, and believe me, if you want to dig deep, if you're looking for the allusions to other works of science fiction, works from comic books that this borrows from major motion pictures, certainly structurally there's a lot of analogies to the way Marvel built the Avengers in their cinematic universe, or even 70s conspiracy films, which heavily influenced all of this. There's plenty of pop culture allusions, and that's one. That's a great one. John Teeter, the guy who appeared on Coast to Coast, the NPR program, purporting to be a time traveler. So So there's tons of those types of little Easter eggs all throughout this multi-year storyline, waiting for people to discover. And that's one part of it. What you just mentioned, Stevie, the Teeter conglomerate, this sort of dark and mysterious, very scarily large corporation that, through a shell company, acquired Chikara in the storyline. And some of their nefarious deeds started to be exposed by conspiracy bloggers, news reports, even by fans. Ultimately, this led to what you saw at Never Compromise on June 2nd. Rather than risk further exposure, they shut Chikara down. And while the company went dark and was gone from the stage, there were a number of other wrestling organizations, like Wrestling is Art, Wrestling is Respect, Wrestling is Awesome, etc., that sort of functioned as lifeboats. This is where the Chikara roster went when Chikara was gone. They manned these lifeboats, but it wasn't as simple as that, because villain groups that had been vanquished or defeated in Chikara's long and storied continuity began to return with intent to eradicate all the remaining traces of what Chikara stood for. And it was while this happened, while these other companies, these lifeboats were being sunk, so to speak, that our story of redemption for a really unlikely character named Icarus took place. The character who is, across the last 10 years, the most despised man in all of Chikara history, was the one who led the rally, who brought the team back together and said, it is exactly these kind of groups that we fight, and we must put aside technical or Rudo designations and come together to fight these guys. And that climax just took place at National Pro Wrestling Day this past weekend. Even when things seemed unbeatable, 60 men were at war all at the same time in the center of the Palmer Center, and it seemed unwinnable. Well, a DeLorean time machine emerged carrying a couple long-lost heroes that helped turn the tide. And so the stage now is set. On May 25th, the 14th season of Chikara is about to begin, and it's a really exciting time. Whether you know all the backstory and all the crazy nuance and detail and Easter eggs and everything else, or you're just getting in now, you're going to want to be there May 25th when it all kicks off, because we want to make it easy now for new people to get involved.
I think some people had the inkling that Chikara was always going to come back because, as you said, Icarus was the unlikely hero. We started seeing these videos pop up from time to time on YouTube, these Ashes videos where Icarus was rallying the fans to meet him for, bring Chikara back days and Chikara support events and scavenger hunts and all these little things that kept indicating there's something going on here. And as you said yourself, the Wrestling Is promotions indicated there's something going on here. But interestingly for me, in the middle of all this storyline as it was leading up to this year, I actually met with Billy Rock in Indianapolis. And I got a feeling that he knew more than he could say or was able to say. And I've heard in other interviews that you've done that there were actually non-disclosure agreements out there with the various Wrestling Is promotions. So it seems to me that everybody knew the plan except the fans who were watching. So it's very interesting that this was that elaborate.
To create the type of entertainment experience that fans demand now, you must be willing to go the extra mile. You've got to go all in on these things. The DeLorean is a great example thereof. If I want the fans to be complicit in this story where you must accept that these characters have traveled through time, I better be willing to go all in to deliver on that. Otherwise, I'm failing to fulfill the promise I'm making to my patrons, to my paying customers, to the ones that support what I do. And if they gave up, and I don't doubt for a moment that we probably lost a fan or two along the way. That's probably inevitable when you do something as risky as this. But to be able to very seriously look at the pro wrestling performance art genre and say, what kind of risks must be taken to progress this art form so that it does not always remain the same? I feel like if there's a refrain I hear from wrestling fans, and you're in a very different spot, Stevie, than I am, fans always seem to be saying, where is there something radically different? Who's out there doing something really and truly unique? And that spoke a lot to our inspiration to even want to try something like this, where, like you said, the story is happening in these 8 other wrestling organizations, while it's simultaneously being told through a web series on YouTube called Ashes, but also contains elements of an alternate reality game that happened in the real world, where members from our story, players in our story, show up at fans' houses, where fans of this storyline are required to partake in a day-long scavenger hunt that crisscrosses a major U.S. city in order to uncover evidence to help bring the company back to life. These types of out-of-the-box experiences are very exciting to me, and I'm hoping they're the kind of thing that our audience has been waiting for wrestling to provide.
I think they have. I think that the investment people made who followed the storyline from back then to now is being rewarded by what they saw at National Pro Wrestling Day. It's definitely culminating in an experience that people who gave it a chance and were willing to accept the limitations of not knowing the whole story are being rewarded for in the end. And I have to say the DeLorean is an excellent symbol for you to bring in for National Pro Wrestling Day, because thanks to the Back to the Future movies, people immediately associate that car with time travel, science fiction, and excitement. That seeing that car personifies that there's something big going on. So,
and I'm really glad that the people that did stay with us through this incredibly strange arc, which did at times plumb very dark emotions, it was surprisingly difficult as a storyteller, knowing that this is a fictional narrative, to watch our fans have to mourn the loss of a company that they truly loved. Seeing them have to endure that was very, very difficult. And so it was rewarding on the end of that story to see the euphoria, to see the delight and the joy we were able to give them at National Pro Wrestling Day for enduring all that, for showing the emotional wherewithal, and to reward them for their loyalty. Because ultimately, it is these risks that we take and these stories that we tell and the way we choose to do it, we make it for them.
Speaking of making it for them, obviously during the time that Chikara was dark, so to speak, there were no title defenses. You know, the Campeonatos de Parejas weren't defended. The Chikara Grand Championship wasn't defended. What is the status of those titles now that Chikara is officially back?
Well, with everything about to restart on May 25th, which maybe to some people seems like it's an eternity away, but it really isn't, I think a brand new status quo is going to be established. And if you want to keep up with things just like what you alluded to or any other details, they are coming out every single day. Make sure you're following us on Chikara Pro so that as this new information is coming out, you're going to know exactly what's upcoming, because we do want to reestablish the status quo, but we never want to erase or disrespect our long previous existing history, because we really and truly beholden to the people that got us this far. And I dislike, as a comic book fan, when a storyteller chooses to push the reset button and negate everything that's come before.
Absolutely. Yes.
To put it in terms, I can recall, I guess it was a Monday Nitro where when the broadcast opened, there was a new WCW logo. Standing in the ring was the entire roster divided into two camps, and I think it was Vince Russo was standing in the ring with a microphone explaining that today we're starting over. Today we start fresh. Everything that came before doesn't matter. These guys are over here, and they're going to be fighting with these guys over there. Get ready. Here we go. That to me is it's a shortcut. It's a cop-out to do that type of thing. To just say, all the work of everyone that's come before, forget about it. It doesn't matter. Because to me as a viewer, that's the moment where I disengage. That's where it's okay for me to check out. What's that, DC Comics? You just erased the 30 years of comic book continuity that I grew up with? Well, then I guess I don't care anymore. And I don't ever want to put our fan base in that position.
Right. It feels like a huge slap in the face when you follow something for that long and you're told everything that you just followed doesn't count and it doesn't matter. And Vince Russo was pretty much slapping the fans in the face, which is not something I would ever accuse Chikara of doing to their fans. I mean, some people may have misinterpreted the dark period that way, but I didn't interpret it that way. So I want to commend you on always showing respect to your fans and keeping the continuity of what's gone before. But of course, I get asked these questions all the time. Like, for example, Dasher Hatfield beating Eddie Kingston this weekend at National Pro Wrestling Day. And Kingston is sort of in limbo with Chikara as it is and hasn't defended that title. So some people are already saying things to me like, well, doesn't that make Dasher Hatfield the number one contender or perhaps even the uncrowned champion? And as you said yourself, these questions will be answered, but not just yet. They're coming.
That's right. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and I would hate for people to think that we're disregarding that because, you know how sometimes maybe you read that it's like me, you're a comic book fan, you read a standalone issue, or you watch movies and there's one of them that's not part of the continuity, and you're kind of encouraged to think that one doesn't count. No, everything counts. You must be able to account for those kinds of things. You can never say, we get a pass on this. I think when you're doing that, you're showing a type of contempt for your audience that I don't ever want our product to do.
Fair enough. So I think it's safe to say then that we'll see Pieces of Hate come back and defend the titles. That's a pretty safe bet.
I think there's a lot of story to be told, and I want to tell you that everything that's come before is not going to be disregarded. It's not going to be erased. It needs to be honored. It needs to be followed up on. It needs to be heightened and explored, and that's our responsibility to our customers as storytellers.
All right. Well, I won't press you for too many details, but I will press you for one detail. I want to know, how did you get a DeLorean to Easton, Pennsylvania? Where did you find it? How did you get it there?
You'd be surprised. Virtually everyone I've spoken to in the last 5 days has asked me exactly that. And, I'll offer this to you because this is a really strange subculture. Maybe not as strange as pro wrestling subculture, but a strange subculture in and of itself. There are people out there that make a very healthy side living by, they either, how do I want to say it? Not build, but, maintain, show cars. I guess that's what I want to call them. Show cars like the DeLorean or the Batmobile or the General Lee from Dukes of Hazzard or things like that. Have you been to like conventions or things where you've seen these types of cars?
Oh yeah. In fact, last year I went to a World of Wheels auto show because Edge was doing an autograph signing and they had the Batmobile there. I
think the Batmobile is probably the most common, and you know, there's also tons of different versions of the Batmobile, whereas the DeLorean is, you know, a very specific thing, or the Ectomobile from Ghostbusters is a very specific thing. Right. But they are out there. If you're thinking to yourself right now, the only way I'm going to get through Valentine's Day is if I show up in the Batmobile, a couple Google searches and you might find one near you. So it might be a little bit of a process. Might you have some logistical hurdles to overcome? Sure. But like we said just a few minutes ago, if you want the fans to come on the journey with you, you better be ready to go all in on these things.
You definitely figured out the logistics. I don't know if you shipped it by train or had somebody drive it there or what the deal was, but it showed up and fans saw those gold wing doors open and 3.0 and Archibald Peck walked into the building and it was like, oh my God, it's on like Donkey Kong.
I sincerely hope someone really said that.
I think my friend Danberg might have said that, and he's one of the ones who had several of the questions that I've been asking today, so I want to throw a shout out his way. He's a longtime Chikara supporter, been to Easton for many shows.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. I always like hearing that people have been with us for the long term.
Yeah, he's definitely a long haul fan, and I go back a little ways myself because, like I said, this is not the first time I've had you on the show. In fact, going way, way back, I remember we talked about the Ted Petty Invitational and the time you took that unfortunate bump where you were knocked for a loop and probably shouldn't have been still wrestling that day, but you were. So I think if anybody doubts your commitment to pro wrestling, you've taken all the hard bumps, literally and figuratively, to keep Chikara going.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I wish I could tell you in greater detail about that, but that's a very foggy weekend in my memory. And I don't mean to make light of it, but that's really the only way I can look back on it because it was a very serious injury, and you're right about that. It was probably very ill-advised of me to continue wrestling in light of receiving that concussion. But sometimes you just have to kind of look back on these unfortunate things that have happened to you and best to laugh about them because otherwise I think we'd be crying in our beer all night.
But I also think that ever since that time, we've seen a greater heightened awareness of concussions, not just in wrestling, but in all pro sports. You know, they just had this big convention at the Brain Center for Health and Awareness where they brought in Bellator, UFC, boxing, all sorts of different companies, and they came together to address this issue that, you know, concussions are dangerous and people shouldn't be allowed to compete if they're showing the signs of concussion. And this has become a very huge issue with WWE in the last 3 to 6 months, with wrestlers who've been, you know, seemingly on a path towards something special, and then they get sidelined by a concussion and their storyline gets derailed. Yet at the same time, it's better for their own sake if they don't go out there and compete with that.
It really does require a shift of everybody's mindset, because there was definitely a time in wrestling where a concussion was considered quite negligible. You would never think about missing a date because of a concussion. And we all sort of, in light of all the new information and the research and stuff that's come out in the last couple of years, we all need to adjust our mindset.
Well, and speaking of adjusted mindsets, I know that National Pro Wrestling Day wasn't just about bringing Chikara back. In hindsight, it feels that way now, but it was both a celebration of pro wrestling, the sport that we all love and enjoy, and it was for a good cause to raise money to buy nets to prevent malaria. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address that.
On National Pro Wrestling Day, both the fans that attended live and those that were watching along, or maybe they weren't even watching, they were just kind enough to donate, helped us raise a terrific sum of money for the Against Malaria Foundation. And they do just as you described, Stevie. They help people in malarious parts of the world, particularly in Africa, where every day 3,000 children die on a daily basis from malaria. One thing that's really been encouraging to me is even now that National Pro Wrestling Day is several days in the past, people are still donating. If you go to nationalprowrestlingday.com and scroll down there, you'll see the link where you can donate to Against Malaria Foundation. We are creeping toward a total donation of $8,000, which is tremendous and far exceeds what our goal of $5,000 was. So it's very encouraging. It's really heartwarming to see that wrestling fans took our cause to heart. And our cause was this. On National Pro Wrestling Day, we wanted to show the world the positive power of professional wrestling. And we did that by raising money for people who will never know where this aid came from. We will never meet these people, know their names, or see their faces, but their lives are better because of the work that we did. I think that's a truly noble cause, and I'm really grateful to all the fans that donated, and maybe to those fans that are thinking now, I want to go out and donate and be part of this movement, because we are doing good.
There's no time to stop right now. Everybody can still get on board with this. And even if the campaign officially ends on National Pro Wrestling Day, you can still go to Against Malaria and still support the effort there. So it's not like just because the day is over or the show is over or the campaign is over that you still can't contribute.
And something quick I want to say about the Against Malaria Foundation and why we chose them as our partner. There are 3 independent sites that audit charities and nonprofits for their efficacy. And across the board, Against Malaria Foundation is ranked number 1 for this reason. 100% of the money you give them goes to the people that need it. You can look at some other charities or nonprofits out there that I'm not going to name, and you'll be stunned to see that some of them, up to 90% of the money you give, goes in the pockets of the people that run it, and not to the people that need it. Right. And this particular organization, because they're all volunteers, goes right around that. So you know you are doing the most possible good for the dollars that you give when you donate to the Against Malaria Foundation, and that's why we chose them as our partner.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm with you on that 100% because I've looked into several charities over the years that I've donated to, and you see that the Fat Cat vice president, gets like $300,000, and you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't this a charitable organization? Why are you paying yourself $300,000 that could go to needy people? It's frustrating when you see those kind of things. So it's as heartwarming that we give to fighting against malaria as it is to know that they care as much about it as we do when we donate. It makes you feel like it's worth what you're giving to.
Exactly. And I'm glad that whether it was just from, I think there's something we all feel when we know we've done something like that for somebody in need, or whether it was something very specific about the presentation of National Pro Wrestling Day, or the thrill in your heart when those goal-in doors opened and Archibald Peckett 3.0 came out. it was really about a positive expression of the power of pro wrestling. And if we were able to make people feel that for even a moment, then I truly feel like it was a success.
I think the whole card can be considered a success. I mean, the Chikara talent that we already know and love was all there represented. And then we had these great, unique individual matches like Colt Cabana and Drew Gulak in 2 out of 3 falls. And I know Cabana has done work with Chikara before, and I'm not saying he hadn't. I'm just saying that Cabana is world traveled and works in many promotions in many places. And it was, you know, what a way to open the show with him and Gulak having 2 out of 3 falls. And then from there, so many more talent came in, you know, Mike Bennett, who we've seen so much in Ring of Honor, and Eddie Kingston, who I've already said works all over the place. And it's just an incredible lineup that went into National Pro Wrestling Day. I mean, even Sanjay Dutt, Magic Sanjay Dutt was part of the show.
We were really fortunate to have an outstanding cast that made that possible, and an outstanding support staff and crew, because those kinds of things just don't happen by accident. But everybody was really, I think, inspired by what the mission of the day was, and everyone rose to the occasion. Even those that aren't with us regularly, like Colt Cabana, who, you know, is with us on an infrequent basis, or Mike Bennett, or Maria Kanellis, Sanjay Dutt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of them really rose to the occasion on that day, and that was really inspiring.
And I enjoyed Maria coming out and making those plugs for the malaria campaign, and, you know, kind of passing the mic back and forth between her and Gavin Loudspeaker was like, you know what, this is a perfect way to remind people of the cause and to make it part of the wrestling as well as part of the cause, because some people have very strong feelings about Maria Kanellis. They either love her or hate her, but either way, she is immediately identifiable with pro wrestling, especially with her partnership with Mike Bennett. So when she comes out and says, whether you love me or hate me, you know, this is a great cause and support it, you almost have to get on board with that.
Right. And I think for those out there that maybe just you've not had the opportunity to see, maybe Maria's true personality shine through, you should check out the podcast that she and Mike Bennett just launched. Mike and Maria in Wonderland, I believe, is the exact title of it. They're just a handful of episodes deep, but it gives you a little more insight into what those two folks are really like. Because what you see, their show personas are not necessarily them, and that's not necessarily a good indicator of what they're really like, because they're both not only are they total pros and real pleasures to be around, but real class acts too.
Absolutely. I think that just goes to show what a great point it is to summarize Chikara as a whole, is that not everything you see is what you think it is, that the people who portray these characters are different. And I honestly feel like even though it's a scripted storyline, that we actually saw a little of Icarus's true personality coming out in this storyline, that this was something very near and dear to his heart, not just in the storyline sense, but that Chikara means that much to him as it does to all the fans who've watched it over the years. Yeah,
there's always got to be, I think, the underpinnings of a story like this must speak to real emotion. And if there was no true emotional engagement, there was no emotional investment, not just on the parts of our fans, our wonderful patrons and paying customers, but also on the parts of the performers, something about it would feel inauthentic. And there's something I think that can always be said of us at Chikara when you hear us. It is done with our authentic voice. Even though it might be very niche, it might seem esoteric to you or off the wall or kind of wacky, it's always our authentic voice.
And that's the last point I want to make before we close today, because I heard you say this in another interview, that sometimes people don't think that Chikara represents wrestling because there's these wacky characters and costumes, and they go, I can't take that seriously. But I heard you describe it in another interview as the performance art of professional wrestling, that you want to push the envelope and say, we understand that you want to believe in it, but we also know that you think it's a fantasy world that you want to take part in, and we have to deliver the best fantasy and push it to the furthest extent that we can.
And I think the era where there was some secret that wrestlers guarded and they were like corralled in the back having a laugh at the expense of, I think this is one of the most odious terms I've ever heard, the dumb marks out front. I'd like to believe that era is gone, and that way of thinking is obsolete. These are our paying customers. They're coming for a very specific type of experience, and we've made a promise to them to deliver that to the very best of our ability, despite whether it's limited resources or limited availability to talent or whatever other limitations or impediments we have, it is our job to overcome them so that we always fulfill that promise to the audience. Because if it's within our power to do that, and we don't, we're showing contempt for the people that support our art form. And that is like a repulsive concept to me. What you said there is exactly right. It's exactly what I believe about our particular type of performance art. And the days of we're having a laugh at your expense are over. You're in on the joke with us. You are in this fictional narrative with us, and we're all part of the same story playing together. And that sense of community and that sense of inclusion speaks to what I love best about this art form.
Amen to that. I don't think we can end it on a better note than that. So I will just say this is your opportunity, Mike, for open plugs. You know, the show coming up, we want people to know Chikara is back. They want to be able to attend that or watch it or however they get it. So let's get those plugs out there.
Well, I certainly hope you can come and be part of it. Come be in the room with us Sunday afternoon, May 25th. We're starting at 3 p.m. We'll be in Easton, Pennsylvania, right back at the Palmer Center where you saw National Pro Wrestling Day. This is the kickoff to season 14. If you've never seen Chikara before, this is a great time to get in. And if you've been with us all along, don't worry. It's going to be more of the fun-filled Lucha Super Show you've come to know and love. You can keep up to date with everything that's developing with us by following us on Twitter at Chikara Pro, because the information is starting to come fast and furious, and that's how we're disseminating it most quickly of all. You can expect to see new developments as we relaunch our website, ChikaraPro.com, next week. And thank you for giving me a forum to speak very frankly about this. I am trying to get out there as best I can this week so that people hear it direct from me about what we've done, what we're doing, and where we're going in the future at Chikara. And I'm really grateful, Stevie, that you gave me the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I got one more real quick question. Is Chikara Special Tumblr an official Chikara dissemination point? Because I just discovered this Tumblr earlier today.
It is not official, but I guess it's about as close as you can get. They do a terrific job there of making sure all of our information is collated in one place. And especially if Tumblr makes it easy for you, that's a wonderful place to keep up to date with stuff. They do a great job for us.
Well, it's thrilling for me because then when I check my dashboard and there's something new about Chikara going on, I'll see it pop up right away. So hopefully this interview will pop up on their Tumblr as well. Thanks again, Mike. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Stevie.
All right. That'll wrap it up for Thursday Night AMP. We've been joined by our special guest, Mike Quackenbush. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a great night.